Okay, this is Kelly Turner, PhD, revisited regarding her books about cancer. The first one is this one, Radical Remission. And Radical Remission, I thought it was a great book. It was a big bestseller. Here's her later book is called Radical Hope by Kelly Turner, PhD. And she did spend a lot of time studying cancer. She's a young lady. I briefly had given one brief video about her before, but I just reread her book, the Radical Remission book, and parts of the Radical Hope book. I don't think the Radical Hope book has that much new information, but the Radical Remission this book's kind of a classic. You know, what does she define as a radical remission? It's basically somebody who beats the odds on getting better. You know, somebody who heals without conventional treatment or who outlives their prognosis, you know, much better than expected. But they're still not necessarily, most of her patients, anything like Ruth Heydrich or Janet Murray Wakelin or some of those other ones. She is, what's great about Kelly Turner, you know, she was working with counseling cancer patients, and she noticed that no one seemed to care that there were some patients who survived metastatic cancer. She's like, why don't we study these patients? And she literally went and interviewed over 100 metastatic cancer survivors, and she read all the case reports on them. There's no big study on them. There's not enough of them, and they don't usually get reported. So she read all of that, and she personally interviewed them, and she's collected them over time. And she's like, well, why aren't we studying the people who have the best outcomes? So that's brilliant. What she's best at is getting into the psychology of the patients. Even if you read a case report about a patient who survives metastatic cancer, they usually just say, you know, spontaneous remission. And what she said is, no, that's BS. It's not spontaneous. These patients did tons of things to get better. And she's especially good at talking to the psychology of the patient. And the patients who get better, they're not the passive wimpy types. They're the ones that are real assertive. They sort of take charge of their care. And I think she does good with that. She lets them say it, how they all figured it out. Like one guy took his PSA and then he just checked his PSA real frequently. And anytime, like let's say he changed his diet for a month, if his PSA went down, he kept eating that way. If it went up, he stopped eating that way. If he did some activity and it seemed to cause his PSA to go up, he stopped doing that. So he was titrating his behavior and diet to his PSA. I thought that was interesting. Not necessarily worth doing, but, you know, it certainly is a guide. I mean, it's a clever idea. I wouldn't check it so frequently. I would just know I'm doing the right thing, but he needed more guidance. So anyways, that's what her real strong point is. I actually think this is probably like maybe the first book a cancer patient should read. So they break out of that. It's like an enlightened moment. You break out of this idea that, oh, well, I hope the chemo works. I'm screwed. That's the wrong way to think. The right way to think is, who gets the best outcomes? How can I get the best possible outcome? What do the people who get the best outcomes do? And really study that with a completely open mind. And so, on the one hand, it was great the way she goes through all the psychology of the patient. On the other hand, some of these patients are kind of nutty, and they would go through all this, like it's almost bizarre superstition, but, you know, and I think that was probably irrelevant to the cure. But for what it's worth, she'll go through all of that. Some of the things of the patients who beat the odds, they typically, like I said, took total charge of their own health. They would listen to what the doctor had to say, but they wouldn't necessarily agree or go along with it. They would do everything they could to minimize their stress, let go of their resentments. And that kind of reminded me like Chris Wark. Chris Wark actually knows Kelly Turner. She also knows, and I think she must be friends with Kelly Brogan. So Kelly Brogan is like my favorite crazy psychiatrist. You know, the old joke is psychiatry is the only field where the doctor's crazier than the patient. She's really smart, that Kelly Brogan. She's a little nuts, but she's really smart and she's good too. So I like her. She made an endorsement for one of these books. That's why her name came up. Let's see, what else? Laughter is good. So somebody having a friend that you can make each other laugh, that's a great thing, and that lowers stress and helps with healing. It's an ability to see your own situation from a different perspective and see the humor in it, and that's a healing thing. My mother was great at making jokes and laughing at her situation, and I think that's why she was expected to die in 2 to 3 years, and she lived 11. If only I had known about food, she might have been like, you know, Ruth Heydrich and Janet Murray Wakelin. So anyway, who were alive, you know, 20, 30. Ruth Heydrich is alive like 45 or more years after her cancer, with metastatic breast cancer, was diagnosed. Okay, Janet Murray Wakelin is alive over 20 years after her metastatic breast cancer was diagnosed. What are some of my criticisms of Kelly Turner's book? She's a little wimpy on diet. I don't think she has done her homework to really study diet in general. She doesn't have a clear-cut mentality. Yeah, she says eat more plant foods, but it's not eat more plant. It's eat only plant foods and low-fat plant foods. And there's good reasons for all that. We'll talk about some other time. Okay, what are some other observations? Kelly Turner's very pretty. She's a redhead. There's a picture of her on the back of this book. And there's plenty. She has her own website. I think it's kellyturner.com or radicalremission.com, something like that. That's her website. And what was kind of weird was she narrated her own book. It's the Radical Remission book. This is the one there's an audio CD for. And I found it entertaining. I listened to the whole thing cover to cover. But I noticed her voice is a little bit monotone. She doesn't go real high or doesn't show a lot of emotion. I think that's kind of weird because I've noticed that a lot of women are like that. It's like if you're their boyfriend, girlfriend, or husband, man, they got this dynamic range that's from top to bottom way more than the guy has in an argument. A guy can't cry in an argument. A guy can't scream and yell in an argument. He has to kind of keep his cool, okay? A woman could do anything she wants. She can cry, she can scream, she could get all crazy. She could do it. She's got this huge dynamic emotional range that a guy doesn't have in a regular conversation with a guy. But on the other hand, when they narrate an audiobook or often when they give a lecture in public, they stay in this narrow, almost monotone professional thing. I was kind of surprised by that. I like the fact that she narrated it because, I was listening carefully to the nuance. And a lot of times a woman talks with her face. Their little eyebrow goes up or they make a little thing or they turn their head. And that's how I really understand a woman. It's hard to understand a woman just like on the phone. They always have an advantage on you. Because with a guy, it's pretty much what he says verbally is everything. You don't even need to see his face. With a woman, seeing her face and understanding her is a big step towards understanding her. But anyways, what else was a little bit interesting? Oh, I'll just give an example in my own personal experience. I was the best student in my medical school class, but the second best student was this girl, this lady, and she was really smart. She was super pretty, but she was almost like the opposite of me. And what I mean by that is, for example, she never wanted to speak in public. Never, ever. She was freaked out by it. She would even take beta blocker medications if she had to speak in public because she would be so nervous. She was like a 10 out of 10, super fox gorgeous. She had a kid at home too, so all she wanted to do was get done with her job and go home. We did a residency together. In 4 years, she never ever did anything unusual, never ever did anything that I would consider interesting. I can't even remember her ever saying a single word in conference. She's always intelligent, competent, thoughtful, all these good things. But there was like a difference totally in style compared to me. And compared to, I don't know, I think men in general. Like a man wants to show off. Men always wish they had some more attention. A lot of times we're lonely and we feel neglected or under-respected or whatever. And we show off. We have a big mouth. We seek attention, okay? Whereas women, and I think especially a pretty woman, and most young women are pretty, but I mean, they want to avoid all attention at all costs. It's kind of weird. And I noticed too, let's say you work in a big corporation or something. You're walking down the hallway. You'll see a woman, they'll be looking at their phone, and it's almost like they're kind of trying to make sure no nice guy loser starts talking to them and wasting their time with tedious conversation or flirting with them or something they really don't want. So it's kind of look at that phone, quick, go where you got to go. Whereas a guy walks down the highway, hey, anybody I can talk to? I've been sitting in my cubicle all day. I'm lonely. Okay, it's funny, but it's different. In my experience, that's true. Let's see. What else was interesting too? Oh, we did residency together. Okay, and now I was about twice as smart as her academically. Not to brag, but it's true. Okay, and what I noticed in residency, our residency attendings, they loved her. She was like the perfect resident, the perfect way to behave. Never made a wave, never did anything unusual or interesting. They offered her a job and a fellowship, whatever she wanted. Okay, with me, they were just happy to get me out of there. Go to Harvard, get the hell out of here. We don't want you back. That was kind of the difference. She was a chief resident. I was not allowed to be chief resident because I learned the material so fast, I refused to go to conference. I stopped going to conference after my second year out of 4 years. That's resident conference. I still went to attending conference because attending is you can learn a lot from. But I found resident conferences an insult. What am I sitting here in this baby talk? It was a waste of my time. I traded all my time from the rich, prestigious hospitals to go work in the poor hospitals and the bad neighborhoods because they let me function in a much more advanced level. I could do procedures myself, whereas in the big fancy hospital, you'd have the attending doing the procedure or the fellow doing the procedure, and the resident would be sitting there just watching. Whereas you go to the poor hospital, the resident could do everything, the entire case. So I like that. Okay, what else? Yeah, like a typical thing is a residency director says to me, "Why are you so intense? You always push everything." And he meant that as an insult. The attitude was just learn your trade, learn how to make money, have a nice life. Why do you push? Always trying to discover something new or, challenge some conventional way or something. And I never apologized for it. I knew that that was what helped me to learn fast. I liked being that way. I dated, and it's not just this one girl. I dated another girl also in my field, very, very pretty girl, and she was real smart, and she would love to talk to me and analyze complex stuff, but in public, super, super quiet. She was just like the one in my residency program. Never would they ever tell a joke in public. No way. If they ever gave a presentation, it would be completely polite, professional, and somewhat monotone. So anyways, I thought that was kind of interesting. Oh, just one last comment on, I got feedback from, my wife said, "Oh, my friend saw your video and she saw your mustache and she thinks you look terrible. You need to get rid of that mustache. You should grow back your goatee." So I thought that was funny. And I actually think that's my wife's opinion. And she just says her friend said it because she knows I would ignore her. Then the other thing was she said, "Stop putting your hands up. You're flapping your hands around. You look like an idiot." And I said, "No, I actually think there's a reason to do that. It's more interesting than just a talking head." But for what that's worth, I thought that was a little bit amusing.